You're listening to The Deep End, a Penn Plastic Surgery podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Hank Davis, joined by my co-host, Dr. Saida Zori. Today, we're thrilled to speak with Dr. Eric Liao, a pioneering surgeon-scientist known for his work in craniofacial surgery and groundbreaking research in developmental biology. Dr. Liao has established the Center for Craniofacial Innovation at CHOP and has contributed immensely to our understanding of craniofacial anomalies through use of the zebrafish model. In this episode, we'll dive into his career, his approach to translational research, and his vision for the future of surgery. Let's jump in.
Very special morning here today on the Deep End podcast. We've had a lot of requests trying to get inputs from the audience as to who we should have next, and Dr. Liao came up a number of times, and everyone knows who he is, but just to briefly introduce, because he's relatively new to Philadelphia and to us, but he's professor of surgery at Penn Medicine. He's a director of Center for Craniofacial Innovation. He's vice chair of academic affairs at CHOP, Department of Surgery, and he's a presidential endowed chair at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's been an incredible mentor to many around the nation and world, many of whom are my friends and have recommended that I try to develop a closer relationship with him. So we're excited to have him here today and going to kind of pick his brain about a few things, including his path to medicine and success. So to start off, I'd say, tell us a little bit about your path to medicine, surgery in specific, and craniofacial surgery.
Well, thank you so much, Sayed. I first just want to thank you and Hank for this opportunity to share some of my path and also something about academic surgery. And it's really thrilling to be at Penn. Penn really is a leader in plastic surgery, and even from the grand rounds this morning, as we talk about robotic microsurgery, we're just so fortunate to be at a place like this full of surgical leaders in our field. Your question about my path to medical school, I think it really comes from a personal experience with my grandmother, actually. When I mentored many generations of medical students, and I'm always impressed on how they end up choosing medicine. Oftentimes it's based on very incomplete information, a notion that we can make an impact in the world. Hopefully that's the reason. And certainly I think just growing up, that sort of the idea to always do something positive for another person. I think that's my motivation to go into medicine, and I think came from the home, growing up with my grandmother.
Yeah. I mean, you're a true surgeon scientist, so I'm curious what your first love was. Was it being a basic scientist, or was it being a surgeon?
Right. No.
You have to pick one.
If I had to pick one, it would be surgery, because I'm impatient and I want to see results right away. And I know if I go to work and I take great care of patients, something positive will happen.
Yeah.
Science is almost the opposite of that. Science gives you the thrill of making a discovery, and that discovery making impact for patients that you don't have a chance to meet. But it's a different mentality where typically only 1 or 2 experiments out of 10 actually work. But when they do work, the high is much higher than, say, doing a great job taking care of a patient, because the downstream effect of that, the impact of that discovery will really move the needle on progress.
Absolutely. What's so funny is that you mentioned 2 things that I feel like test your patients in completely different ways. I feel like surgery, I totally agree. I find myself like surgeons are innately almost impatient and want immediate gratification, whereas science, I spent 2 years at the NIH, and that really tests your patients, and talk a little bit about how you can teach yourself to be patient when it comes to science, because especially for all those people who are interested in it, particularly basic science, they have to know that the reward isn't going to be a paper in a month. It's not going to be, an abstract in a week. It might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be never. you might have negative results. So talk a little bit about patience when it comes to science.
Right. No, I think that's a great point. And having traveled in that path yourself, you truly know the difference. I think when I think about being a clinician scientist or a surgeon scientist, right, it's really in a somewhat of a arbitrary definition, and one way to have a better frame around it, more a definition for it, is just you want to be a true change maker. You want to make an impact. And then for all of us, we have to think about, like, we have limited time on this earth, and we have limited time every day. What can I do that I am good at and that I like to do that's going to make the greatest impact? And if you think of it that way, I think as plastic surgeons, we're very, very fortunate, right? We really, truly make a difference in patients' lives so that they can have a better well-being overall, whether it's for a child for the rest of their lives or for middle-aged patients that we identify with ourselves. So I think for many of us, you included, Saeed, is like we can do surgery, but then we can also ask big questions and do research. And when I think about research or surgeon scientists, any time you have a question or hypothesis and you do something to test that, that's science, right? So it doesn't have to be in the archaic notion that you have to be at the bench, pipetting, right? But it could also be looking at big data. It could be studying a patient very carefully. So anytime you ask a question, that's science. So I think, then if that's the frame, then the frustrations that one may experience in experiments not working, or the data not panning out, or whatnot, if you take that in the scheme of, this is just a path to that eventual goal of making impact, and that impact is not, easy, that it takes persistence, then those failures and so forth fall into the realm of expected, so that it's just part of the creation process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You spent a lot of time at other esteemed institutions like Stanford. You've been at Harvard for a while. Were there some pivotal moments that kind of led you to where you are today?
No, thank you, Hank. As I think about, we're a product of our environment, right? But at the end of the day, it's both intrinsic and extrinsic. So those extrinsic factors, having spent time at Stanford or Harvard, I think it's most important the people I had the opportunity to meet at those places. When I think about Stanford, I think Stanford has this, I think the young people call it the vibe. The Stanford vibe is that there's this intellectual freedom, that no question or no idea is too crazy. And so that you are ignorant enough to want to dream big and ask big questions. So I think that's what I took away from Stanford, and which also serves you very well in plastic surgery, right? Thinking outside the box. But the unique people I had the opportunity to meeting, one of them is regarded as one of the innovators and pioneers of stem cell biology, is Irv Weissman. And Irv Weissman and some of the postdocs in his lab, I just remember working on a paper in his class on stem cell biology, just even at night walking through the hall and finding someone that happens to be there that's a postdoc. His name is now Morrison. I haven't talked to him since when I was undergrad, but he's now a famous scientist in his own right in stem cell biology. But just this guy who was a student athlete basically sat down with me, went over, the science behind identifying stem cells using fact sorting. Fact sorting, the technology was invented at Stanford. So being in that environment, the people who are generous with their time. And I think I took away from that, I said, well, that's who I want to be. I want to be someone who's generous with my time when people come for help.
Yeah. So we're excited that you left and decided to come here to Philly and CHOP. Can you talk to us a little bit about the Center for Craniofacial Innovation and what the vision is for that?
Thank you. It's really it's really such a privilege and a thrill to be here. I think when I came here, I went for my physical, and I now have hypertension, and I attribute the hypertension just to being excited every day to come to work. So I think I really enjoyed my time and the beginning of my career in Boston. I don't think I'm so grateful for all the mentors and friends I formed there. I was in Boston for 26 years, from training until when I left Mass General. I was the vice chair of our department. I was the chief of staff of our pediatric hospital at Shriners. So to leave that, to come here, it was honestly somewhat unexpected. But then it comes back down to people, and the people I knew over the years, one being Jesse Taylor. We grew up in plastic surgery at the same time in residency, so we've known each other through the national platforms and meetings. And then the other person, there are many people, but another person I would attribute it to is Scott Azik. Scott Azik is the chair of surgery at CHOP, as you know, and he's been here since the 80s. Scott innovated the whole field of fetal surgery. Doing, again, big ideas, doing things that people thought were not possible, right, but now made routine. And you may or may not know many leaders then at CHOP, all trained at this place in Boston called Mass General, including Scott Bartlett and others, right? So in fact, in Boston, we say CHOP is, Mass General's nickname in Boston is men's greatest. So then CHOP is kids' greatest.
Oh,
right? So,
I love that.
So to have the opportunity to come here, to join Jesse, and I think really many of us regard CHOP as one of the leading craniofacial centers in the world. So the clinical side it's really unbelievable. The other main reason that why we came is because of the science. You may or may not know that the first FDA-approved drug for gene therapy is a CHOP innovation. It's Spark Therapeutics, right? And then one of the other main technologies changing the landscape of medical care today is CAR T therapy, having our hands on engineered cells to cure cancer. And then the last is genomics. When you want to do genetics and find the genetic basis of conditions, these days you have to be where the patients are because of genome sequencing, next generation sequencing. So those three technologies of gene editing, base editing, CRISPR technology, mRNA technology, the second being have our hands on the cells to modify them, and then the third, the genomics and identifying genetic drivers of disease, whether it's birth condition or cancer. Turns out all those three things converge on one place of Civic Boulevard, where we sit today, right? So then, as someone who's spent their career, most of my career, taking care of patients with a birth condition and studying the genetic basis of craniofacial problems, then this is exactly where I needed to be. So that here our goal is to not only make better diagnosis of genetic conditions from genomic studies, but then to be able to change the trajectory of that disease through gene and cell therapy. So those are the projects we're working on now. And that comes under the umbrella of the Center for Craniofacial Innovation. It's to really harness the promise of these genomic technologies to actually improve patient diagnosis and treatment.
Wow.
Well, we're thrilled you came here. I'm sure it was tough to leave Boston, but you also touched on, this is digressing a little bit, the importance of how small of a world plastic surgery is. Like when you and Jesse Taylor met years ago, it's not like you both were thinking in 30 years, there's going to be some opportunity for us to work together. But it shows you the importance of keeping these relationships, building these relationships, being a good person, although that's kind of innate. But it shows you what a small world it is, and you never know when you're going to cross paths with somebody again, especially from training or whatnot. In terms of your zebrafish model, can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of the direction it's heading and
Sure. Most people don't know too much about zebrafish. Some of you may have had a zebrafish if you had an aquarium growing up, because it's a very, very popular pet that you can buy in most aquarium stores. But what put zebrafish on the map as a genetic model happened in the mid-1990s when I was going through undergrad, actually. And the seminal work is a collaborative, what we call a genetic screen that was done between Boston, Mass General, and Max Planck in Tübingen, Germany. So that's in the 1990s that put it on the map. So I was very fortunate then to be then a graduate student at Harvard, working with Len Zahn at the time, who then trained me, and then I was in the first cohort of people working on zebrafish. And the other thing I learned from grad school was, and from Len, is again the same lesson. Think big, think about impact and what you can do with this. So then my PhD thesis, then that you can probably guess, having talked about stem cells and then now working in zebrafish, was actually studying stem cells using the zebrafish model. So fast forward, somehow I came into wanting to do surgery. Many of my mentors thought my scientific career was over. And then I'm in the operating room with John Mulliken in Boston Children's, and we're doing cleft repairs. And in order to convince him to give me the needle, I would talk to him about science to distract him. And he was very interested in science. So I would explain the papers to him. In fact, he gave me this whole folder of, back in the day, you would go to the library and actually make hard copies of papers. So he gave me his whole folder from 1972 when he first started and asked me to explain the papers to him, right? So that sort of got me thinking, you know what? If I could have a career doing cleft surgery, but then on the science side, do something most surgeons don't think about is the genetics of this. Maybe this is an avenue to take. So one of the main advice you'll hear from many mentors is always, tackle the biggest problems you can. In plastic surgery for congenital conditions that we treat as plastic surgeons, clefts, we are the main providers of care for clefts. Clefts orofacial clefts are also the most common birth conditions in humans. So then the genetics of this then, around the time when I was starting out in the early 2000s, it's just starting to emerge. It's just starting to emerge that we can do whole genome sequencing to identify genes for certain processes. But turns out when you've identified these genes, you don't know when the genetic sequence, when it goes wrong, called gene variants, when do those actually cause disease? Well, as a surgeon, I do fetal consults because you can identify clefts from ultrasounds. Mm-hmm. So families ask you questions, how did this happen? Why is that? Mm-hmm. So it dawned on me that we can use this genetic model, zebrafish, to study clefts and use this as a model to test human gene variants. Fast forward, 15, 16 years later, that's what we've been doing, and that's what we're funded to do from the NIH, because turns out having gene variants associated with disease, but not knowing when it actually causes disease, that's the biggest gap in knowledge in human genetics that people don't talk about, and people don't talk about it because there's no easy solution, and even with AI, it's not able to do it. So it turns out, at least today, you still have to do experiments to figure that out for the most part.
Wow.
That's I mean, I could tell your true passion for it, and that we could probably spend hours and hours talking about it. But it's those times that you're in the operating room and you're inspired by somebody else, and your comment about distracting them with science in order to get a needle kind of sets the stage for how you became a surgeon scientist, if you're thinking about those two things at once. So you should do that at some point.
Yeah.
Try to distract the attending. But in terms of, I think one thing that's so nice to have you around, and for especially junior faculty, even senior faculty, residents to learn about, is the whole establishing yourself to be a success in research, and taking that beyond, writing a paper or writing an abstract, the whole number game that we're fighting these days. How many papers can people put out? Please tell the audience, what is research success in your mind? How can people get better at things like grant writing, coming up with a good study and taking that to fruition? So share us some of your kind of pearls in success.
So I think this question, it will probably take me 2 hours to answer. First of all, because I think it's such an important question, and also that it is so important to get good at what you're describing. So let me frame the question a little differently in speaking about academic surgery, about how to gain skills in being a successful academic surgeon and what that means. I think one of the key things, as you started to talk about research, are we doing research for impact or just writing a paper, right? So I think there's a balance to that, and it goes back to this tripartite mission of all medical centers and all medical school deans want the three things. The first is take great care of patients. The second is to do research and innovate, because without research and innovation, you cannot move the needle on diagnosis and treatment. That's what all of medicine, right? Being a doctor is to make diagnosis and render treatment. And then the third is then training the next generation, is education. And how do we, try to do all three things? And I would first say to all the young people thinking about this career, to not listen to people that tell you that you cannot. that you cannot be a triple threat. You cannot do all three things, because it is feasible, and it takes drive, and it takes mentorship, it takes all those things, but it's definitely feasible, and it's the most fun to do. So then, granted that when you're in residency, you want to gain, really terrific clinical training so that you can be the go-to person to take care of clinical problems, right? That's the foundation. As you go through that at a place like Penn, or certainly back in Boston, what we wanted and tried to do, and had some modest success with, is to then really teach trainees and junior faculty the skills. The two key things, one is mentorship, having a team approach to mentorship, having mentors who are within surgery, but also very importantly, mentors outside of surgery.
Yep. Experts
in your content area of research or whatnot to really help you. So having a team approach to mentorship, and do that intentionally. Having a dashboard for yourself, iteratively, going back to that, right? If it matters that much to you, and it is your career after all, you will be intentional about it. So one is mentorship. The second then are key skills, and there are many. There are skills in communication, there's skills in picking problems, and one of the key skills today is to garner funding, and
Yep.
and some may view writing grants as a chore, but if you turn that chore into something that is helps you sort of focus your thoughts about problems, and proposing experiments that are sound, there are also benefits of that. So it's sort of a balance. Then, as I mentor people, of course, every person I mentor, I try to think about, what are the key things they need to do. Of course, part of that is going to be developing your CV. So they need to write papers, but as much as possible, we want to write meaningful papers. I went to a talk once, and the speaker said, he asked a question: the amount of time it takes to do a project and write a paper that wins you the Nobel Prize, versus the amount of time it takes to do a project and write a paper that nobody cites. Do you think there's a difference? Turns out there isn't.
Wow.
So that every time you write a paper that maybe has not as much of an impact, maybe because the question is not big enough, right? So then if you really want to spend time writing a paper, might as well spend time writing a paper that at least means something to you, and hopefully will answer a big question.
Yeah. You talked about mentorship. I think it's important for the audience, at least from my experience, is that you have to also be prepared for a lot of self-directed learning, because unfortunately the good mentors are spread thin, because people know that you're a good mentor, and so then you end up having 75 mentees. So a lot of it is going to be self-directed learning, but as you kind of mentioned, just pushing through and seeing the brighter side ahead, I think helps. Talking a little bit about that, who are your greatest mentors?
I think for all of us, it's hard to pinpoint one person, right?
Yeah.
It's really, I think, but what you said of being self-directed, I think the way I approach mentorship and when I work with young people, a lot of it are good things I did learn or pick up from people, but also I learned also the converse is I've seen certain things done, maybe I would hopefully do better, right? So we learn both ways.
Exactly, yeah.
And I would say, a lot of our mentors happen in the home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
I mentioned my grandmother and seeing
Absolutely.
our parents, work so hard, to provide for the family, right? Those are very ingrained examples of mentorship. And then the other is just being open-minded. And I think one of the things that we all look for, and I think you do as well, you have a pretty big team, is you look for people who are coachable, who are going to listen, both to the positives and negatives, and always be not complacent and wanting to improve, right? So I see that in almost all of our residents and faculty. We just had this grand rounds where we taught microsurgery, and even when you're a leader, to still think about how can you get better, right? I truly believe I'm a student and still learning, and I want to get better. So that coachability is so important. And then as you go through your training, just always think about, what can I borrow from this or that person? And some mentorship is formal, sitting down one-on-one, but a lot of mentorship is just by observing.
Yeah.
So because I would say a lot of my best mentors and people I learned from are people that I have just admired and observed and studied their careers and learned that way. So I would say the world is your mentor.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Being a surgeon scientist, at least to your extent, is somewhat like the road less traveled, But if you're someone who's interested
in pursuing that path and you're in medical school, what are just some other key, I think we touched on it a little bit, but are there some things you can start doing now? It seems like getting into medical school, matching into plastic surgery, and also running a lab like you're running are so many different mountains. How can you break it down to make it like seem possible and tangible for like someone up and coming?
Well, if you put it that way, I'm already exhausted.
Exactly.
Well, I think medicine and science are the same in that these are things that you can't cram for or prep overnight. Right? So number one, then, in order for someone to persist at it for so long, that takes decades. It really takes decades to build. Then it has to be something that you're passionate about, just something that you go to sleep and wake up thinking about, right? So then you'll just do it because it's natural to you, and I think that's a cliche, but it's true. Okay. The second then is to always be self-reflecting and coachable for yourself, meaning that you want to learn from mistakes. How could I do that better? In surgery, we do this every week through this conference called M&M, Morbidity and Mortality. It's actually my favorite conference because it really grounds us. It forces us to be introspective of us as surgeons and then learn from our mistakes. We all make them. If you play football, you're going to get tackled, right? So if you write grants, right, you're going to have some grants, more grants than not, right, be triaged or not even discussed or not funded, right? So that's going to happen, and having that fortitude to sort of persevere through that, and you're going to have good days and bad days. At the end, you're going to fall back to your family for support, your friends, your mentors, right? So I think if you're a young person starting out, make sure you're passionate about something, whatever that passion is, and then do something about it. Whether to do a project, reach out, and then along the way, be very intentional. Write down what your mission statement is. What is it that you want to do in the next 5 years? Who are the people that you want to recruit to help you do that, right? The fact that now we have a podcast, the fact that we can meet people on Teams, right, makes us all closer. So that reach out. Certainly, I've met young people who just reach out in such a way that is so compelling. Over the last 2 years, as you may have seen, we've grown a pretty large team.
Yeah.
We've gone from in 2 years, we've gone from 2 people to now I think over 20.
Wow.
Right? I feel like I work in human resources recruitment, right? But it's actually, when I reflect on it, I am actually a talent scout. I'm a talent scout trying to recruit people to our residency programs, both in plastic surgery and general surgery. I'm a talent scout building a scientific, laboratory, including faculty and trainees at every level, right? So that, and I think that the characteristics of being open-minded, coachability, passionate, persistence, all the things that are pretty commonly talked about, but when you put it all together, sometimes then it can be a little rare. And Hank, like what you said, taking the road less traveled, right? The less traveled road may be more bumpy, but the rewards are often greater.
Yeah. And as we look forward into the future, what are some of the things that you're most excited about or in the world of craniofacial surgery?
Closest to top of mind right now for craniofacial surgery, there are two. One is really taking advantage of all the science and integrating them. So Children's Hospital Philadelphia, that is actually in our mission statement, to truly integrate the clinical care with research. There are many times when we take care of patients, we say, well, we should study that. But there's no IRB. There's no way to study that. We don't have the device to study it, right? So then just how to integrate that. So in the last 2 years, now we have all these 3D cameras to study all these things. We're integrating patient care, but at the same time collecting the scar specimen for sequencing and identifying genetic drivers to do gene therapy and so forth. So one is major integration of clinical and research. The second then is really thinking about what matters to patients. Patients from all over the world come to CHOP because sometimes when they go online or talk to their local providers, they realize what is written about by CHOP surgeons and teams is not what's being done at their local institution. And then they look online and they talk to another doctor. They're all different stories. So this patient odyssey, to me, is not really acceptable. It shouldn't be that if I have a child with a rare condition, or even a common condition like cleidocranial synostosis, why care is so fragmented and disparate? There's no agreement on what procedure to do and when. So how do you move the needle on that? Is you have to have prospective, multi-site studies. So we're hoping that we can get that off the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is that, seeing your passion and your joy for everything that you're saying reminds me of, in your earlier comment, where like the road less traveled, the reward is greater. Reminds me of Tom Brady's speech. I think I sent it out to you from the Hall of Fame, where he says being special isn't hard. You just have to have determination and persistence, which is so true. And when you're talking about science and surgery, I feel like a lot of it is that it's to be special isn't hard. You just have to kind of be determined and persist. And this interview today has taught me a lot, but more so, I'm kind of interested in how do you balance it all? How do you balance, clinical responsibilities, research, what your hobbies, going home, kids? How do you do it all?
I think I agree with you. I think you don't have to be special. You just have to work at it. It's easier said than done. But the work is then just the consistency. And I see that in so many of our colleagues, that the consistency that you need to be a great surgeon, to keeping it simple, right? So what I've observed on surgeons who are fast and surgeons who are successful, their operation is just easier. It's simpler. There are less steps. So if you apply that to your life, make your life simple. Live within your means. Don't overspend. Make your life simple. Finding someone as crazy as you to be your partner, to do it together.
I hear that.
Who is forgiving. Surgeons always wanted a yesterday, right? So someone who hopefully is patient. And I certainly am very fortunate. My wife Lillian, we've been known to each other since high school.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah, so we went to Stanford together and so forth. So
that's great.
having a partner
So
in
she
life.
knew you were.
Yeah. So, but with that long-term relationship, also just comes this implicit understanding and trust, right?
Yeah,
so that
it's
just every day it's a given that we're gonna get through this together. We have two wonderful children, Will and Olivia, and they're the best kids, and thinking about them certainly. Then it's easy then to be a motivation to so family first. The second then is just surround yourself with people like you, and I've been very fortunate in Boston to have friends and colleagues that are similar in mentality about approaching problems. Different problems, but approaching them with the same rigor and being collegial. And then coming to CHOP and Penn, I was glad it wasn't just a facade when I interviewed, that people really are genuine and so forth. And then certainly I studied Penn as a program for a very long time, and really always admired it, so that even before you came on as faculty, we knew each other, and I knew about you certainly, so that it really is a very friendly and collegial and collaborative place. So I'm just thrilled to have this second chance in my career to come to a place like this, and hopefully in the next 15 years leave a mark of mentorship and innovation that would then transcend space and time, right? As our trainees go out into the world and build their own programs, and over time as our papers are going to be published, hopefully, and some of the big problems, right, they repeat themselves, but then we tackle them with new technology. So at least if we identify those problems that we are not going to be able to solve today, but the future Hanks of the world and the progeny of that maybe hope one day we'll solve those problems.
Yeah. The audience is going to love this, because in the little time that we've had together, you've shown so much about what a special person you are and how genuine you are. And when somebody is asked who their greatest mentor is, they talk about their grandmother and putting family first. I'm the same way. Families first. I know, Hank, you care a lot about that. And if you find somebody who is as excited for you about your own accomplishments and your own goals, I think that'll set you up for a very successful career. And having been in a relationship for such a long time, at least your wife knew what she was getting into. But so What do you miss most about Boston, and what do you like most about Philly?
The good news is I do miss Boston. I miss the people, right? And I don't.
Are you still going to retire there?
Well, so I think you may know we already have our retirement condo in Boston that we still have. So I don't feel like I really did. I feel like I haven't really left, right? So that's part of it. But I'll tell you, I don't miss the traffic in Boston. Traffic here is much better, as much as we complain about it. Philly is a very warm place. People are very warm. People are genuine. The food scene is awesome. I've gotten many recommendations from all of you on restaurants, so we've been exploring a little bit. And of course, the best thing about Philly is Pen and Chop, right? Mm-hmm. As you land in the Philadelphia International Airport, the largest buildings in town, some of them have Chop and Pen logos on them. So, I'm just so proud to be affiliated with this institution and all the resources and investments in us. My 5-year goal, near-term goal, is to at least match and hopefully exceed the investment that the institution has put on us, so that we can really integrate science with clinical care to really advance care for people.
Yeah. Wow, and thank you again so much for taking the time to join us. This is such a special episode. I think our audience is going to love it. I have a few more fun questions, too.
And I have one more, too.
Okay, awesome.
Uh-oh.
Do you have a particular go-to music in the OR?
Or have you the old school no music?
Yeah, you're allowed to say that, too.
So when I was asked this years ago, it was actually no music. Mm-hmm. The reason is because during the OR, I would use that time to talk to the resident about their careers, and I didn't want the music to interrupt that. Mm-hmm. Another reason is I imagine I am the patient. Yeah. And if I was a patient, I don't want my surgeon, swinging their hips and dancing in the OR, which doesn't happen, right? So from those perspectives. And the last reason I didn't have music before was I listen to the beeping of the heart rate, so that I can detect the depth of anesthesia, sometimes even before the anesthesia resident. Right?
Wow.
So those were the reasons. But over time, I've evolved, and the most important music you listen to is whatever the nurse wants.
I like that answer.
So now at CHOP, the favorite music is usually a combination of Carpenter, Swift, and Celine Dion.
Yes,
nice.
That's
awesome.
That's a good combo. I've asked a number of people this just because I'm always impressed by how much they do. How much do you sleep at night? Like, what's your sleep routine?
That is actually a really, really important question for many reasons. We can talk about the science behind it, but you need to have sleep. Sleep hygiene is really important. I think the goal is to try to get 9 hours, and 8 to 9 hours. I think I get that just one day a week on Saturdays, hopefully.
Because your kids are no longer young. That's why.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. Everyone has their own cadence, and I think these days you can even wear wearable technology to see what your cadence should be. But for me and for many people I know, after 10 o'clock, it's not useful time. Mm-hmm. It's turn off the devices, don't be scrolling, and just go to sleep. And surgeons, we have to get up early, right? Only for the operating room. Operating room starts at 7:30, but surgical committee meetings, surgical leadership meetings,
all the
earlier,
other things,
all the other stuff, right? So if you have to be up at 5, you want to be asleep by 10. So my regular schedule is try to go to sleep by 10 and wake up by 5.
And just make sure you fit in listening to the Deep End podcast before you go to sleep.
Yeah, listen to it in the car.
Yeah.
It's so funny talking to people not in surgery to tell them how early we get up. I was at dinner the other night talking with some non-surgeons and told them that my wife and I are usually up by like 5:30 getting things ready for the day. We're out the door by 6:30, and they're like in shock. Like, how do you do it? It's just like a completely different world.
Yeah.
But anyways,
my last question for you is just what's your favorite surgical instrument?
My favorite surgical instrument is the Castro Viejo needle driver.
Awesome.
Both locking and unlocking for different purposes, and different
like
lengths,
that.
Right, depending on where you need to be. And I also love medical history, so reading about Castro Viejo and the innovations he made to make microsurgery possible and transplantation possible. Yeah, so that's the instrument.
Awesome.
Cool.
Wow. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thank
This was
you.
amazing.
This purely showed how fortunate we are to have you here. So thanks so much for joining us today. I think the audience is going to love this.
Thank you
you.
so much, Hank. Thank you so much, Sayid.
Yes.
We're
Thank you.
grateful for the time. Thank you.